Good morning, folks. We're going to finish up our lecture on Chapter 3, and I'm going to show you some examples. And if you have any questions on any of the previous assignments or the current assignment, make sure you post those in the chat. Or if you're watching this as a recording, you can email me. The Chapter 3 assignment is due tonight, but if you need more time, just let me know. So we left off talking about different types of CSS and some new CSS properties and what CSS is, how to use it and what it's for, all that kind of stuff. And now that we know that, we can move forward and take a little bit of a deeper look at some new properties and different ways to use CSS. Okay, so the part we left off on was different types of CSS selectors. So if you remember from the beginning of the chapter, we looked at how to create a CSS rule, and it needs a selector, property, and value. Okay. And all of the selectors we had used up to this point were just tag name selectors, and those affected every element on the page with that tag. So this one is changing the text color of the body to blue. Okay, so that's just going to change the body, but if we put like, I don't have, maybe. If we had something like this, well, seems to be going slow, so I'll just do it in here. So if we had, for example, p-tag selector, and for this example I'm going to use embedded CSS so that we can see it on the same page and I don't have to keep flipping back and forth. And so how do we use embedded CSS? We have to put opening style tag and closing style tag, and then between those we only use CSS code. So do color red, And so that changes the paragraphs to red. Okay. But it also just changes all of the paragraphs to red. Okay, so what if we wanted some of them red and some of them green? What could we do? Because if we just put another one, we have no way to specify in here which paragraphs to change. Okay, so if we did this, two CSS rules that are both affecting paragraphs, they'll just be applied in order. So it'll change all the paragraph text color to red, then it changes it to green. Okay, so it ends up being green here. And so basically we can't use tag selectors like this if we want to be more specific about which elements we change. All right, so we did learn that we could use inline CSS with the style attribute to individually change each element's properties which will allow us to, one by one, we can change each paragraph individually. But can you think of any downside to using inline CSS in this way? All right, so think about if you were creating an entire website for an organization, okay, and they wanted, specific company colors. Maybe their colors were red and green. So you would design, you would integrate those colors into your site design. And then, let's say, right after you're done, they decide to change one of their colors from red to blue. So now it's blue and green. How much work would it take to go through and replace every inline reference here for multiple web pages? It would take a lot of work. So this isn't really an efficient way to apply differences to different elements, different properties, to different elements of the same type. Okay, so these tag selectors are more for setting like a baseline or a default, right? And then there is something we can use that will allow you to specifically select different groups of elements and apply rules. Okay. And so that's where we're starting the lecture today. So if you haven't watched the previous chapter 3 video, make sure you check that out to get caught up, because this might not make any sense if you're not aware of the previous material. All right, so these are different types of selectors. Remember, that's the first part of a CSS rule, right? We've already used HTML element selectors. Okay, that just uses the tag name to apply the rule to all of the elements with that same tag. We also have something called class selectors and ID selectors, which you will need to know how to use, and we'll take a look at that. And then we'll also talk about descendant selectors, which allow you to select even more specific elements in specific situations. Okay? So let's start with the class example. So here it says allows you to apply a CSS rule to a certain class of elements on a web page. So what is a class? Well, in this case, it's basically just a value that you get to create. Okay? So in this case, they're showing an example of how to use a class selector. All right? And these are just, changing color and font style. That's not new. But this right here is different than what we've seen before. So the important thing here and the way to identify it as a class is to notice the period before the word, okay? And then you get to decide what the class name will be. So you just type that here. In this case, they're calling it new. And now they have this is an embedded CSS rule that changes anything with the class of new to follow these properties. So down here is an example of HTML on the page, okay? You notice to give an element a class, we use the class attribute, okay? And then we just give it the name of the class. Now, this is important. Down in the attribute value, you don't put the period, but in the CSS code, you do, okay? So let's take a look at this. So we have our 4 paragraphs, and we want to make them some red and some green. Okay, so I'm going to make them all red at first here. Okay, and then I want to make every other one green. All right, so I'm going to create a new class. I'm going to call it green text, because you can choose whatever name you want. I don't think it can start with a number, and it can't contain spaces. All right. There may be some other syntax rules for CSS. They're easy to look up. You shouldn't encounter any problems if you just don't start with a number and don't put spaces in your class names. All right. So we want to change the text color of anything with the green text class to green. Okay, so that doesn't do anything on its own, but now if I ever want to use this class, all I have to do is add in the class attribute and give it the class. And so once I have this typed out, I can just copy it and throw it in the other elements. Okay, so now we have half red, half green like we wanted. Okay, let's go back to the example. They no longer want red and green. Now they want red and blue. So before we looked at, if we used inline, we would have to go in and change the rule for each inline. Okay, because we're using classes, both of these elements are only looking at this one rule. We can change them all by changing the property. So if I change this to blue, it'll change anything with this class to blue. So that way you can quickly change different categories of elements individually. Okay, so you can have multiple classes too. So let's make one called background. I'll just call it, actually, it's not a good idea to use names of properties and things, just in case. It can be confusing. So I'm going to call this special BG, and we'll give it a background color, okay, of yellow, because that'll be hideous. All right. And let's say I want to apply that class to this element. Actually, let's do it to this element. Remember, I just did class equals, and I put the name. So let's copy copy that. And now that element will have a yellow background. Okay. Let's say I want this last one to have a yellow background. Well, it already has a class of green text, but if we want to use multiple classes, we just include them in the attribute. And we can actually use multiple classes to change individual elements. Right? So you can overlap your classes. This gives you a lot more control over the customization of your page. Sure. See, it says 4 concurrent viewers, but in here it only says 1, so I want to make sure you guys are seeing this. So if you're having, well, I guess you wouldn't see this, so. If someone could say hi in the chat, I just want to see that anyone can see this. All right, I don't see it. Okay, well, I'll just assume you guys can see this. If not, you can just watch the replay. All right, so that's basically classes in a nutshell. You have to remember how to represent them in CSS, how to represent them in HTML, and this ties them together, right? In CSS, it has to start with a dot, then the name. In HTML, you use the class attribute and the class name, but don't put the dot in here. All right, this next one is how to use IDs. It's almost identical to using classes. The only difference is if you want to make it an ID, instead of putting a dot, you put a pound sign. Okay? And in the HTML, instead of putting class, you just have to put ID. All right, so it's that simple. Very similar. If I want to add a new rule to affect anything with the hello ID, then I just have to add it here, and we'll give it a font size of 2em. Alright, and then let's give it to this one. ID equals hello. And so here's the rule. It's affecting anything with the ID of hello. So we have this. So that one's bigger. All right, so that's how those are linked together. Now you may say, wow, those are almost identical in the way they're used. Why do we have both? So basically, you're pretty much in the real world going to be sticking to using classes, because that can do pretty much anything you need. With IDs, the idea is you should only have one ID value. All your ID values should be unique on the elements in the page. Okay, having trouble wording that, so I'll just show you. So on this page, we have one element here with an ID of hello. We shouldn't put the ID of hello on any other elements. Okay. And the ID is also used by software like the browser and some programming languages like JavaScript to access certain elements to manipulate them. So if there were more than one hello ID, that would kind of jam up the code and it wouldn't know what to do. But with classes, you can use those on as many elements as you want. All right. Hey, Alex. I'm still working on those playlists. I gotta do it. I know it won't take me very long. I just need to do it. All right. So classes and IDs, how to use them, what they're used for. In the assignments, it's going to ask you to use both classes and IDs. So you just have to look back here if you forget, or look at my example. And moving forward, if you're ever given the choice, just stick with classes. Okay. I don't know why this is missing. Okay. This should say Descendant Selector here. I'm not sure why it's not saying that. Okay. So these are a little bit more complicated. It says a Descendant Selector allows you to specify an element within the context of its container element. Okay, so let's break that down. We talked about a specific container element inside, or in Chapter 2 called a div. Okay. And if you remember what it is a block element that has neutral properties, all default properties. So it's basically a blank canvas that you can manipulate however you want. But one use for them is to create basically sections on a page. And I think I've shown you that before on the Lakeland web page. So basically any kind of section here that you see as, you know, a separate area or separate box could be divided up using divs. So let's see, I'm going to check these elements using the inspector. And you open this up by pressing F12. So I'm selecting, I activate this little arrow here, and then I can select anything. So here, this one with the buttons in the search bar is a div with a class of wrap. This one is a div with an ID of mega menu wrap primary with a class of mega menu wrap. So you can see these get fairly complicated. And this specific website was built using WordPress, so a lot of the names and properties are all basically set up by a program for you. So the names are all going to be very generic. Okay. So anyway, we're going to put some elements inside of this div. And if you remember, that's called nesting. So let's put let's put an H1. Okay, and then we will put H2. Paragraph. Okay, and it's useful sometimes to have a lot of text in your elements to see how it looks on the page. In most of the examples so far, I just use one word, but if you ever want to get just a body of text that you can copy and paste, I mean, you can grab it from anywhere, but if you don't want to have to worry about what you're copying, you look up something called Lorem Ipsum. All right. And what this does is it generates gobbledygook text. So you scroll down to here and you can say, okay, I want 200 words. And then here it generates that for you, and you can copy and paste it inside your paragraph. And so we now have a H1, H2, and this paragraph. Inside of that div, let's put another H2, and actually I'm just going to copy that. And since this paragraph is really long, let's see if it lets me. I think it will. Oh, it does. Okay. I can actually, in Replit, so I don't have to keep scrolling up and down past this, I can hit this little minimize, and then it shows me, or it kind of shrinks it down, and you can click it to reopen it if you ever need to, but that way we can kind of see what's going on. I want to put another H2. Okay. And another paragraph. But this time, let's use, there are some funny different kinds of Lorem Ipsum sites you can use, generators that generate some funny stuff, so there we go. 14 best Lorem Ipsum generators. So we have we used lipsum.com to generate just very generic. Let's see. Zombie Ipsum. Looks like it puts a lot of zombie related words in your text. The Godfather Ipsum, apparently. Samuel L. Jackson Ipsum. Whoop. Don't use that one. All right. Monocle Ipsum. Philorama. So there's your Futurama placeholder text. Lit Ipsum. Uses text from books. Cupcakes. Hodor Ipsum. Okay, let's use that one. So you can probably guess what the Hodor Ipsum looks like, but the way you decide how much is you put in the number of doors you want. Okay, I want 2 doors worth of Hodor. Okay, looks like when you generate it, it selects it for you. So you can just copy, throw that in our new paragraph. So I think another one that I like that I've seen before is Bacon Ipsum, and it's all meat and barbecue related terminology. That's kind of good. Makes me hungry. All right, let's see what that looks like. So we have title, bananas, blah, 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 apples, blah, blah, blah. So now we have a kind of a page we can work with here. Now, if I can remember what point I was trying to make. Oh, yeah, the Contextual Selector, or in this case, it's a Descendant Selector. So I'm going to open this in another page so that we can see the whole thing at once. And I'm going to use an HTML comment to turn off this top stuff because I don't need it right now. And so to do that, you do open angle bracket, exclamation, dash, dash. And then wherever you want to close that comment, you just put dash, dash, closing angle bracket. And so you can see this part's grayed out. That means the browser will ignore that when it's rendering the page. So now if I refresh this, it should be gone. And if you use Lorem Ipsum, I think it's based a little bit off of Latin, or it might be exactly Latin, but it's since it's a dead language, I guess it's safe to use. But anyway, if your browser may ask you to try to translate Latin, translate it from Latin to English. And it's kind of funny to see what it says. Thinks facility is antioxidant. That's a weird word. Okay, anyway. So our paragraphs here are changing to red because we have the rule up here. It's changing all paragraphs to red. All right, let me add another paragraph at the beginning before the div. So let's actually just add another paragraph here, just so we can see how this works. So let's say we're going to be setting up our pages to follow this kind of pattern. We'll have an H1 with like the article title, and then we'll have subsections as H2s, and then the content for the H2 will be a single paragraph after each H2. Okay, and then we'll keep adding H2s and paragraphs. So let me add. I'm going to add in another H1 and H2 up here. And don't forget, you can right-click and do format document to quickly indent your code correctly. So I'll call that one test H1 and test H2. All right. Going a little bit slow today. All right, there it is. Well, there's the paragraph. Still trying to process this. So I guess while we're waiting for that, we can go ahead and write the rule. We'll write a rule that uses a Descendant Selector. Okay, so let's say we want the paragraphs inside of the div to all have black text, but any paragraphs outside of a div need to be red. Well, right now, all of the paragraphs are turning red, but we only want to change all the paragraphs that are in divs to black. So how do we select that? Well, we use the div selector. That'll select all divs on the page, and then we use a space, and we put paragraph. Okay, that will be our selector. And when you put a space in there, what that means is find all the divs on the page and change the paragraph color to black. All right. So the test paragraph at the top should be red, and any paragraphs that are inside of a div should be black. And since that is kind of freezing, I'm going to go ahead and show you just in Notepad. That way we don't have to wait. Okay. So now we go to Notepad. I think you should be able to see. Yeah, you can see that. So I'm just going to copy all the code from Replit. And then I'm going to hit Control S to save this. And to be able to test this out on my computer, I need to save it as an HTML file. So I'm going to call it test.html. I'm just going to save it into my documents because I'll just clear that out later. All right. And then if I go to my documents and open it with Chrome, I should be able to test out the changes. So go to documents. Actually, looks like under recent files it's showing me, so that's useful. Open that with Chrome, and you can see the test paragraph is red, and only paragraphs that are inside of a div go to black. All right, and you can make these descendant selectors as complicated as you want. So maybe you want paragraphs that are inside of divs that are inside of divs. Okay, so that should change it. So I'm going to copy the code, throw it back in Notepad. So Control A to select it all, paste over it. Don't forget to, in this case, Replit saves automatically for you, so you guys might not be used to saving when you make changes in a text editor. So you generally, at the top, it tells you, what file you're working on. If it has the star, that means it's unsaved. So as soon as I hit Control S, you'll notice that asterisk will go away. Now I know I'm ready to test it. So I can actually just go back to my page here and just refresh it once I save to see those changes. So now, since these paragraphs are only inside of a div, not inside of a div inside of a div, they're going to go back to red. And if we add, let's put this apples paragraph inside of another div. Okay. We'll save that. So this test paragraph here is not in a div, so it follows the rule that change paragraphs to red. This one is a paragraph inside of a div. We don't have a rule for that right now, so it just follows the paragraph rule. This paragraph is inside of a div that's inside of a div, and we have a rule to change those to black. All right. So I don't think we do all that much with descendant selectors, but it's just good to know that you have that option. Or if you encounter them, if you're working on something else, you understand what's going on. All right? And if you follow a certain structure for the web pages on your site, you can manipulate a lot of things quicker without having to create additional classes and IDs. All right, so that's a lot about CSS. Now I told you basically the rest of the class after Chapter 3 is just introducing additional HTML elements and CSS properties. So if you finish the Chapter 3 quiz and the Chapter 3 assignment and you do well and you understand what's going on, the rest of the class, this is where the learning curve levels off, okay, because we're just adding in new elements to HTML and we know how to use elements. And we're adding new CSS properties and we know how to use those, okay? So all it's going to do is introduce new ones, tell us how to use them, and tell us what it's for. Okay, so the first one it's introducing is this thing called the span element. Okay, and let's go ahead and just take a look at what it does. See if this is loading yet. No. Okay, I'll have to keep using Notepad then. I think if I refresh this, I'm gonna lose some code. So if your Replit ever disconnects and it won't let you connect back, before you do anything, make sure you copy your code out and save it somewhere so you don't have to retype everything. Because if Replit does not have an active connection, it won't save. So it's a good thing that I copied this to Notepad. All right, so we want to use this, we want to have an example of a span element so we can see what that does. So the purpose of a span element is to change the properties of text in line. So I don't want to, you know, change the fact that this is an H1. I just want to change the word test in this H1. Okay, so I can throw a span in here, and then I can just assign a class to it, or use inline CSS, but I'm going to use a class, and I'm going to call it emphasize. So the idea is I'm going to apply this class anywhere where I want to emphasize a word. So I need to add that class as a rule. So how do you do that? Remember? How do you add a class? So I called it emphasize, so that means I have to put a dot, then put emphasize. Should I spell that right? Yes, okay. And let's give that a color of white and a background color, background dash color of black. And then let's see if I can remember font, weight, bold. Actually, I think each ones are already bold, but we can use this on other things to make sure they're bold. So I'm going to save that, don't forget to save, and then I can refresh this to see that. Let's say never translate, or no, page is not in Latin. Okay, see if it stops asking me. Nope, okay, I guess I'll just say never translate Latin. Thank you. Alright, so it looks like I might have made some kind of mistake. So let me copy this. I'm just going to copy my CSS, because that's the last thing I changed, was adding this. So I'm just going to take my CSS here. Instead of pouring through it to see the error I made, I'm just going to go to CSS Validator. So I remember I mentioned that last time. So I copied my CSS code, and I'm just going to throw it in direct input. Okay. And we'll see. Okay, so it says line 18. There may be an extra either I'm missing a curly brace or there may be an extra one here. So color, colon, white, that should work. Background color, I'm checking for typos. Colons are all right. So that's not super helpful. If I could get it in Replit, I could use the oh, you know what? I also have Notepad++. That has the color coding. Okay, so I'm gonna copy this in. Oops, I'm going to copy all the code in from Notepad. So these are both just text editors. You just have better coding features in Notepad++. Apparently I had a lot of files open in here. Jeez. If I can just close all. And then say, no, I don't want to save anything. Okay. So I copy that in. And it doesn't have the color coding right now because it thinks it's just a text file. So we actually have to save as an HTML file. Then it'll know to apply the correct color coding. So remember we had it as test.html, so I can save that. And I'm overwriting the previous file. Okay, so now, I don't know if this has auto format or not. Maybe not. Okay, so we have that one. You can see, well, I guess you can't see. Let me zoom in. Oops, there we go. Okay. So we're trying to find the error here. Oh, you know what? It might be here. Span class emphasize. Here's our class emphasize. Should change the text color to white and the background color to black. If you guys, let me see if you guys found the error. Okay, I can't seem to get my ID on my CSS page to transfer to my HTML page. Could you show an oh, yeah. So doing it in external. All right. And AKA Colat, I actually get paid to do these classes anyway, so you don't have to donate anything. All right, let's see if we can get back into Replit, and then I'll send you that code if you want to take a look. Okay, so Replit must be down. They might be updating. It's a work in progress, though I can't believe it's not more popular. It's probably the single best thing I've ever discovered for programming, honestly. Makes my job so much easier. Okay. Let's go ahead and close this. Send this code. Let me switch back to, what are we on right now? Do I have it on screen? I do. Okay. Let me switch here. Okay. And then bear with me here. Okay. I don't even think it saved the file. Oh, I don't. Did I even name it? Let's see. Yeah, here it is. Anyway, let me let me show Alex this, because I'm sure other people are asking about this. So I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to save it as test.css. All right, I'm going to also put it in documents. Now it's important, so in Replit, it's easy to take for granted that all your files are in the same folder, and I haven't really put a lot of stock into that. Yeah.
It's in your div p.
Yeah. Okay. Oh. Okay, so in this, so it even told me that here. It said there was an extra one of these on the validator. I just didn't see it. All right. So some of these I didn't put the on the next line here. It's good to be consistent with your code, and I wasn't, so that's a learning example for you guys. All right, using external CSS with a with an ID. Okay, so you gotta have your link element, and you have to make sure it's pulling the right file. So I'm going to pull test.css because that's the one I created, or I tried to create here. Let me make it again. What is this? Save as is Control-Alt-S. Okay. We'll save this as test.css in the documents. So test.html and test.css are in the same folder. They're in the documents folder for me. You can't, if you put them in separate files, you have to use the correct file path. So for now, you can just put them in the same file, or I'm sorry, in the same folder, but make sure they're in the same folder or it won't work. Okay, so let's create an ID, and we'll call it red, and we'll have it create a background color of red. Save that. We'll save the HTML. And one nice thing about Notepad++ is you can hit this Run button, and it'll let you choose your browser. So I'm going to hit Launch in Chrome. Just make sure you save. All right, so I fixed that error that allowed me to use this span. We created the ID in the external style sheet called red, but we didn't apply it to anything yet, so let's put it on the test h2. So do ID equals red. That should, when you're working with multiple files, you can also use this Control-Shift-S to save all, because you might edit the HTML and the CSS, and then when you hit save, it only saves the one you are looking at. So make sure you save all. You can see why I like Replit. All right, it saves for you. It tracks the files for you. It sounds like easy mode, and it does kind of make you forget how to save or what saving is or anything. But just make sure it won't work if you don't save all your files. Okay. So let me know, Alex, if that example helped. If it didn't, just send me a link to your code and I can give it a once-over. You can try the validators. I'm going to guess it might be, if you're doing it in Replit, if you change the name of the style sheet or the link, that might be the problem. Usually when people are creating a new style sheet, they forget to change the link. Let me know if that helps. Okay, so back here, I'm going to copy, it looks like it might be working, so I'm going to copy the code back out of Notepad++. I think it's good for you guys to see all the tools being used all at once. I know it's kind of confusing probably. So I'm going to rewrite over that code. Okay, now it's working. So we added a span here in the test h1 right here. All right. So what the span is it's exactly like a div in that it's just a neutral container, but the span has a default of inline, so it doesn't push things to the next line, where divs have a default of below. Oh, none of that stuff. Is that stuff going sure here? It's actually uploading this. Oh, is that me now? Yep. Oh, dang it. None of the stuff I said is on there.
Just do it later. Just don't do it there.
Well, I just forgot to turn on streaming on here. Otherwise it would have worked. All right. So I already went over, I just did this material like 3 times because it kept disconnecting and I messed it up. So I'm just going to go through it very quickly one more time, and if you have questions you can ask. All right, so this example right here, I definitely have to do one more time. So centering the page content with CSS. This is an ID selector, okay? There's some properties in here that we haven't talked about yet, so you just got to take it on faith that they do something. And so what I've done is I put that rule in my CSS, okay? And then you have to create to center everything, you need to have everything in a container that you can manipulate. So what container do we have? We can use a div, and you put that div for your container right after the body. It should be the first thing. And then I'm going to double click on div here to make sure that and it'll highlight in purple down here. It does the same thing in Replit, it's just a different color probably. But it shows me that that div closes here right before the body closes, which is where I want it. Okay, so if you have the container rule with the margin left, margin right, and width, and you apply it to this div that goes basically over everything in the body, it will center your page. So that's not it. That's not it. Here we go. So here it is centered. So I already centered it before. Let me show you. Take away the ID here and refresh it. You can see it's just left aligned. Okay. And if you see how much better it looks once you add that centering code. It's kind of a hacky way to do it. It's kind of a simple way to do it if you are trying to throw things together. Also, that width 80%, what that does is it will adjust your page to fit any size and still maintain that centered look. All right. And so that's that. There will be, I think it will ask you to do that in an assignment, so you can just exactly copy what I did now. You just got to remember where to put it. And quick look. Okay. class. We already went over the rest of this, so I'm going to end it here. If you have questions, you can email me, and have a good day, guys and gals.